Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another AAA Town Hall, where we continue to explore issues important to our members and the motoring public. I'm Lloyd Albert, and I head up our Public and Government Affairs team here at AAA Northeast. This morning, my guest is Terry Gray, Acting Director of Rhode Island's Department of Environmental Management, who will share his perspective on the role the transportation sector plays in climate change, as well as the strategies the state is pursuing to meet mandates set forth in the Act on Climate, a law passed by the Rhode Island General Assembly in 2021. Terry is a native Rhode Islander who spent his entire 34-year career at DEM. A Lehigh graduate with advanced degrees from Northeastern and URI, Terry has been involved in numerous issues impacting the region's environment here in the Northeast. Prominent among these has been his work in developing Rhode Island's Brownfield program, and more recently his leadership of the interagency team working on the Regional Transportation and Climate Initiative. Named by Governor McKee to head the agency last June, Terry is demonstrating strong leadership on a host of environmental initiatives, and we're delighted that he could join us here today. So with that, good morning and welcome, Terry. I know you have some prepared remarks to get us started, so let's turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Lloyd, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about transportation and climate change this morning. I'd like to go through a few things just to give people a little perspective on what's happening here in Rhode Island. First of all, like Lloyd said, we have something called the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council. And this council was established quite a while ago, actually over 10 years ago. And now it includes 13 agencies in state government. And we all work together to really coordinate the Rhode Island actions on climate change. You can see DEM is right in the top left corner of this slide. And I have the pleasure of chairing the EC4 right now, is what we call the council. DEM's mission, in a lot of ways, is to protect, restore, manage, and promote Rhode Island's natural resources and our environment. So we have two big halves of our agency. One focuses on environmental protection, and the other one focuses on natural resources stewardship. And both are really aligned and involved in all aspects of responding to climate change. The EC4 really sets policy for the state. We talk about things like renewable energy. That includes both everything from on-land solar to offshore wind. We talk about things like how to deal with the transportation sector, which is the focus of this morning's dialogue. And we also talk about how to deal with buildings and heating. All of these things emit carbon dioxide into our environment, which contribute to climate change. The game changed in Rhode Island back in April of last year when something called the Act on Climate was passed by our General Assembly and signed into law by Governor McKee. What the Act on Climate really did was it changed a lot of goals into mandates, and those mandates are enforceable in a lot of ways by the ability of people to really file lawsuits if we don't meet our obligations. So it really creates this new urgency, like I said, and this new seriousness in how we have to take on climate change. There's a whole series of deliverables and plans and updates, as well as authorities that are included in the Act on Climate. And the first plan out of the box for us is to take a look at the 2016 State Greenhouse Gas Reduction Plan and update that by the end of calendar year 2022. So that's moving pretty quickly right now. But then we have to get into some long-range planning, and we have a plan due in 2025 and mandates in 2030, 2040, and 2050. And the mandate in 2050 is really to get to a net zero carbon emissions. So we would become carbon neutral at that point. So when I talk about greenhouse gas reductions, primarily what I'm talking about are carbon dioxide. There's other chemicals involved and there are equivalencies, but really what we're talking about is the emission of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is created as an air emission when we burn fossil fuels. So you can see from this pie chart that the state of Rhode Island has a mix of sources, and the big one on the right side is transportation. But you can also see electricity consumption, which is our power sector, as well as residential heating and commercial heating as well as big contributors. So like I said, the EC4 is focused on all of these, but transportation has been one that's kind of been on the forefront for us for the past couple of years. When we talk about air pollution and emissions, including greenhouse gas emissions, really the law of the land is the Clean Air Act. And that applies all over the country, obviously. And the Clean Air Act applies to mobile sources, which are our transportation sources, as well as our smokestacks and emissions that you see at stationary sources. There's also a process that was created with the Clean Air Act where states have a choice of two standards to meet. We can either meet a federal standard or we can meet a California-based standard. There's no in-betweens, there's no alternatives. It's either one or the other. And the reason this came about was at the time the Clean Air Act passed, California was ahead of EPA in terms of its technology and approach to controlling air pollution. And they didn't want to back off. They wanted to maintain their progress, and a lot of other states wanted to join them in really pushing the envelope. So with respect to cars and vehicles, it was important to limit the number of standards, right? Companies like Ford or General Motors or even Tesla don't want to have to meet 50 different emission standards. So what happened was there was a choice. You could either meet the federal standards or adopt the California standards. Most of the big companies now just look at the California standards and they design their vehicles to meet those requirements. And those are the cars that we all buy on the lots and we see available for sale every day. Obviously, when we're talking about limiting emissions, what we really want to do is encourage the use of electric vehicles. And you can see that that a lot of electric vehicles have really been coming onto our roads. They're more and more accepted. Back at the beginning of this chart in 2017, it was kind of an oddity. It was something unusual that you would see on the road. But nowadays, you can see more and more EVs all over the place. And charging infrastructure is becoming more and more common throughout our communities. We want to see these bars get bigger. And that's the kind of the core of the policies that Rhode Island and other states are really implementing now to reduce emissions, especially from passenger vehicles in the transportation sector. The manufacturers are right on board with this. And when we look at what's happening in industry, I think they see the writing on the wall. They know that climate change is real. They know where the regulatory agencies are going. They're looking at both California and now EPA and how they're driving the development of technologies and reduction in emissions. And they're all kind of buying into this. And that's great because that does two things. It advances technology. It increases availability of the vehicles that we want to see on the road. And it also, by this economy of scale, it makes these vehicles more affordable for all of us. So when you see things like Volvo going fully electric by 2030, you see Ford coming out with both an e-Mustang, which is pretty cool, and working very quickly to come up with an electric version of the F-150 model pickup truck. You see a lot of other entities filing suit. So this isn't just a niche market anymore. This is something that is becoming more and more mainstream with the companies that we're used to hearing about all across America. One of the things we're doing in Rhode Island through our Office of Energy Resources is developing some incentives to purchase these vehicles. And what you can see is a program that was recently launched by Rhode Island Energy Commissioner Nick Ucci and Governor McKee to really provide these incentives. It's a program called Drive EV, and it does provide purchase incentives through tax rebates for the acquisition of electric vehicles. And these are in addition to anything that you would get on the federal level. There are certain incentives available there as well. And what it's trying to do is really kind of level the playing field and make electric vehicles comparable in terms of purchase price to some of the more traditional fossil fuel, gasoline powered or diesel powered vehicles. We're finalizing that program right now, and it's looking at it. It'll be launched in the summer, but we think this will be a real carrot out there that'll encourage more people to get into the EV market. Now, of course, a lot of people say, is it worth it? Is this something that I would want to do? So what I did is I ran a federally available cost calculator. Right? There's no inherent biases in this. It's just kind of a straightforward model that allows you to plug in a gasoline vehicle that you might be considering and compare it to maybe an EV model that's out there. So in this case, I ran my 2021 Toyota Tacoma pickup truck against a 2022 Tesla Model 3. And you can see that some of the comparisons where you would see annual fuel use, how much money I would save in gasoline. It factors in the cost of gasoline, the cost per mile, but also look at all the way on the right, which is the annual emissions in terms of pounds per carbon dioxide. Now, this doesn't always translate into your pocketbook, but it does translate into your contribution for what you're doing to combat climate change. What this shows is, absent any incentives, the break-even point for the comparison of these two cars is about 7 years out. Now, I always keep my cars for 10 years probably, so I would hit that break-even point. But things like incentives, like those purchase incentives that I talked about from the Drive EV program, will shift that break-even point to even earlier in the life cycle of a vehicle. And that's what we're trying to do, make it more worthwhile to invest in these new cars. You can run your own comparisons through this website. It's publicly available. It's really easy to use, and see really what the implications are of trading off a gas-powered car to an EV really is. So the other piece of the whole EV equation is, where do I charge these things? And that's pretty critical. So we have been looking very closely at the availability of EV chargers, or in this terminology, EV infrastructure that's out there and publicly available. And the question that really comes down to it is, where are the gaps? Where can we invest? Where can we make it more convenient for people to charge their cars, and also to charge their cars quicker and easier? So there's a process that's been going on now for a few months to really evaluate electric vehicle infrastructure. And you can see this map that shows a little bit of where the chargers are right now. This effort is extending beyond Rhode Island, and we are looking at things called EV charging corridors. So for instance, along the Route 95 stretch, all the way from Maine down to Washington, D.C., we're looking at charging infrastructure to make sure that people can make it all the way and be able to charge conveniently. When you look at things like charging at home through a standard outlet, it takes a long time to charge an EV. But we have high-speed chargers now that are available that can fully charge your vehicle in like 20 minutes. That becomes more and more convenient. So you could go in, have a coffee, maybe take a look at your phone, and come outside, and when the coffee's done, the car's charged and ready to hit another 300 miles on the road. And that's really kind of what our goal is. And we want to make these available where people are kind of staying for 20 minutes. So things like your workspace, you're going to the mall, going to a store, maybe going to the supermarket. All of these are areas where we really want to make charging readily available. The good news on this is, you probably heard about this bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress, U.S. Congress. That bipartisan infrastructure bill included a lot of transportation money that's coming to Rhode Island, primarily through DOT. It also included some money that was specifically designated for the development of EV infrastructure. So over the next 5 years, we're going to have about $23 million in Rhode Island to invest in this purpose. So this map is going to have a lot more green crosses on it by the time we're done. And I think the availability and convenience of charging will be greatly expanded across the state as a result of that investment. As Lloyd mentioned, I worked for a couple of years on something called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, or TCI. What this was a very innovative model that was developed across 13 states in the Northeast United States to try and look at a way to create a sustainable revenue stream to really invest in things like electric vehicles, both as passenger vehicles, but also on school buses, public transportation, as well as commercial vehicles. And we developed a system that was based on the concept of having an allowance or a permit to emit a certain amount of carbon. And there was a fee for that permit. And the revenue from those fees, which would have come in from the oil companies, would have then gone to the states to invest in clean transportation. For Rhode Island, we modeled the revenue being about $20 million a year, which would have created a lot of opportunity for us to do things like the DRIVE program, the EV infrastructure investments, as well as really greatly expand the adoption of EV school buses, EV transit buses, and really start to make inroads into the commercial sector as well. Unfortunately, TCI is on hold right now for a lot of reasons. Primarily, it's concerned because the revenue probably would have come from an increase on the price of gasoline. And as we all know right now, there are incredible pressures on the price of gasoline. The prices are really high due to international unrest primarily. So those type of fluctuations happen. And a lot of folks decided that this just wasn't the time to really be putting this on the table. I don't think it's dead personally. I do think it may come back at some point because the concept of having a sustainable revenue stream to fund this transition and support this transition that we all see coming, I think it is an important component that we have to really, really think about moving forward. So TCI is a great concept. It's a great model. It's well developed and well thought through. It's just on the shelf for now until it's needed. But we may be talking about that in the future. We'll see. Looking ahead, I think the growing number of EVs that you're going to see on the road is going to continue to increase. I met with a company a couple of weeks ago that was looking at an electric trailer truck, tractor trailer truck, which is really an unbelievable innovation. It's not only the tractor part with an EV engine, but it included a trailer component with a refrigerated unit that was powered by solar panels on top of the trailer, as well as a battery inside the trailer. So all of that stuff is powered by diesel fuel right now. So by switching over to electric, it not only eliminates the carbon emissions, but also eliminates a lot of the particulate and other pollution that we see from diesel engines. This is an incredible innovation. It's being led by a couple of Rhode Island companies, and it'll be really interesting to see these units on the road. We're anticipating seeing 8 electric school buses, all electric school buses on the road by the end of calendar year 2022. That's a start, right? But I think when people see these and they start to get used to them, the school districts and the transportation companies that service those districts will really go all in to invest in electric school buses. I think it saves on maintenance, it saves on fuel, and it also eliminates the pollution that our children are exposed to by riding on a bus or involved with a diesel powered bus. You're going to see a lot of new electric infrastructure coming out across the state. The chargers are going to be as common, if not more common, than the gas pumps we see today. You will see those throughout Rhode Island, throughout Massachusetts, throughout Connecticut, and throughout the country as the infrastructure bill rolls out. And you're also going to see more of these incentives. we really want to encourage people to move in this direction. We want to level the playing field, level the cost implications, and make this a cost competitive avenue to the future. Like you saw, the auto manufacturers are definitely producing the cars. They're going to be on the lots, and we want to make it a real cost-effective choice for people when they're shopping for cars going forward. I think with that, I will end my presentation, and Lloyd, you and I will get into discussion mode. Thank you.
Excellent. What a thoughtful presentation. A lot of good information there, Terry. So thank you for that. You showed the bar graph of how many EVs there are in the state, about 4,500 out of some 450,000 registered vehicles. So when I talk to folks around the state about electric vehicles, the issue seems to be shrouded in mystery. I hear people saying, can I afford one? How and where do I charge it? What if I run out of power on the highway? You know, what role do you think the public and private sector play together in kind of demystifying this whole EV ecosystem?
That's a great question, Lloyd. I think a lot of it just comes down to more information, more education, and as people understand things like that cost calculator, they can easily go through the economics themselves and kind of make a decision. Is it worth it or isn't? Sometimes you don't trust other people when they're trying to sell you a car, for instance. It would make sense or to really just kind of go through that math yourself if you can. And the federal calculator is really simple to go through. It's not a really complicated model. So to really just to make those tools available, I will help people make that choice. The other thing is just seeing the chargers. As chargers become more and more common, I think that range anxiety that, oh my God, I'm going to run out of juice and be stranded on the road somewhere that I can't charge again, will sort of be alleviated. So as we see more and more chargers out there, and quite frankly, we see more and more people using those chargers, I think the overall level of comfort will really increase. And at some point, it's going to reach a tipping point where the electric vehicle is going to be more common than the gasoline vehicle. And at that point, I think things will really take off.
And I guess, Terry, if you follow the saying, follow the money, the OEMs, the automakers are investing an amazing amount of money, as you showed in your slide. And just the big three, Stellantis, Ford, and GM, well over $100 billion over the next 2 or 3 years. So they're certainly moving it forward. And I think the opportunity to really make a difference on greenhouse gases, will eventually kind of win out in all of this. But as you're well aware, and we talk a lot about EVs here, but as you're well aware, we live in a very much of a car-centric state where only about 3 to 3.5% of the population uses mass transit to get around. Ideally, people shifting to transit as their primary mode of transportation can lead to a really meaningful reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions. Can you talk a little bit about how you see a shift to transit, how it could impact the climate goals that you're working so hard to achieve? What are the realistic targets we should be striving for, Terry?
That's a challenge, Lloyd, and you're absolutely right. Public transit has always been a challenge. I think it comes down a lot of times to cost and availability, and especially availability. So when we work with RIPTA, I mean, they're constantly analyzing this. That's not my forte, but that's part of the goal. The part of the goal is to not only get people using electric cars, but to get people not using cars at all. And if they can use more public transportation or more alternate modes of transportation, right? We manage an incredibly robust network of bike paths in Rhode Island. And if people could use those bike paths, not just for recreation, but for commuting purposes, that would be a huge win as well. So those are all on the table. And I think we'll be working with RIPTA through the EC4 as well as DOT to get more people on the bus.
So I don't think we can have a conversation about climate resiliency without talking about equity, right? So how do we ensure that the work being done by the EC4 and a whole host of stakeholders really factors in the underserved communities? How do we make sure that funding is really allocated equitably across the ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a really important point, Lloyd. Thanks for bringing that up. Governor McKee directed us to create an environmental justice working group to advise the EC4. That working group is under development right now. The working group is going to represent a lot of the communities that historically may have been underserved by some of the programs that we have, and also the communities that may be overburdened by some of the sources of pollution that we have in Rhode Island. And these sources of pollution are not only just our kind of stationary companies or activities that create pollution, but also our highways. A lot of the environmental justice communities that we're looking at are located very close to our highways, and they have a disproportionate impact from the emissions from the transportation sector. So by lowering those emissions, that helps them out. But also by really listening and providing an opportunity for engagement, we will be able to direct policies, strategies, and activities to really invest in some of these communities where I think it's really needed. And it could be everything. It could be things from making sure there's more trees planted all the way into really kind of drilling into the challenges of making electric vehicles part of those communities where you may not have parking in a driveway or in a garage. You may have on-street parking. You may be looking at longer life for vehicles, that type of thing.
Also, incentives can play a role in this. Citing charging stations where they need, not only where you think they might be needed, but across the state is critical. So as part of the webinar registration process, people can pose questions. I have a few of these I want to run by quickly from you. Gentleman from Johnson and Wales asked, how does DEM and RIDOT work together to meet our climate goals? I'm seeing plenty of new road building, not particularly environmental when lane width equals more cars. So what's your response to that, Terry?
So DOT and DEM work very closely together on a lot of things. Not the least of which is just interacting through the EC4. That's really what the Climate Change Coordinating Council is for. DOT has an incredible challenge of maintaining the infrastructure on the highways in our state. And they are obviously spending a lot of time and money to upgrade our roads and bridges. From the discussions I've had with DOT, there's very little expansion that's included in that construction. And if any expansion is included, it's primarily focused on improving safety. And that's pretty important. We are not building new highways or expanding new highways from what I understand. Every project that they go through is now really being looked at through the climate lens as well. And they're starting to calculate the climate impacts. We're working with other states like Colorado, and as well as federal DOT to come up with models on that. But that has to be factored into all our reduction strategies as well. So there is a pretty good working relationship between our agencies, and I think that's going to continue moving forward.
One could argue if more people shift over to transit, the need for additional capacity is diminished, and that's a good thing, I think. I have a question here, Terry, from a really great advocate, a statewide advocate. He asks, Rhode Island's EC4 set a VMT reduction of vehicle miles traveled reduction target of 2% by 2035 and 10% by 2050. Those are big numbers. Yet between 2014 and 2019, VMT continued to increase pre-pandemic. How can we meet the reduction targets without investing fully in alternate modes of transportation?
I think that's going to be a serious subject for the update of our greenhouse gas reduction plan. We're looking at all those things, and to be honest with you, a lot of the activities that we're seeing, not just in transportation but in all the sectors, still show an increase in greenhouse gas reductions. So we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. This is still early in the planning cycle, and we need to move to execution. And that's the real challenge in front of the EC4 right now, is moving to execution and starting to see those needles move in the other direction. And I think those VMT numbers are very aggressive. They're very challenging. There's only so much we have control of with respect to VMT. So that if people are going to drive, again, we need to make sure that they drive in a low emissions type of way. So that's one of our focuses here. And then I think, like you said, providing those alternate avenues of transportation and really emphasizing and encouraging those are going to be a big part of the strategy as well.
Yeah.
Thank
you showed a pie chart, Terry, showing the renewable energy, the energy grid, and how much emissions are a part of that. How do we, is the grid able to accommodate this growing number of electric vehicles going forward? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a work in progress as well. All of these are works in progress, Lloyd. And remember, the grid was designed a long time ago to deliver energy one way, right? So from the power plant to the user in your homes. Now we see this concept of distributed generation, where there's solar developed, there's solar on homes, there's solar on factories, there's solar being developed in different places, there's windmills in place throughout the state. So energy flows in multiple directions, and the grid needs to be updated to efficiently accommodate that and effectively manage that. We're also talking about renewable energy, right? So renewable energy is very, very efficient when the wind blows and the sun is out. But we need to look at storage too, and how do we make sure that we have reliable electricity on those calm nights, right? So there's a lot of work being done in the power sector, in the electric generation and the electric distribution system as well. And of course, as we move everything to electric, right? We're talking about electric vehicles. We're talking about electric heating and cooling within our buildings and structures. We're putting more demand on that system too. And it has to be upgraded to efficiently manage that demand and match it with the supplies that we're generating.
So Terry, last question, it's an important one. What do you view as the truly sustainable funding streams that will move the state towards the achievement of its greenhouse gas emission targets? Right now, the state is flush with cash, but what about 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. We need to reduce carbon, and it's not going to happen for free. So we need to look at revenue streams. We need to be fair, and we need to be consistent in how we do that. So no one sector can pay for the whole cost of that transition. We're going to have to look at equitably distributing the cost and really looking at how everybody can do their part proportionately to meet our goals. So that means there's probably going to be a contribution from transportation. Maybe that's through TCI. We don't know right now. There's probably going to be a contribution from the power sector. We already have a system called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that is similar to TCI, that's been in place for a long time on the power sector. That's going to keep going. And then there's going to have to be a contribution probably from buildings and structures to meet their piece of the goal as well. So we'll see. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a long transition, and hopefully by around 2050 we'll be at that transition point and meet the mandates in the Act on Climate.
Never a dull moment for you, Terry, I'm sure, for sure. Hey, look, this is all the time we have today. Terry, thanks a lot for taking the time to spend with me this morning and shedding light on a topic that's really important to all of us, to our AAA folks behind the scenes. Thanks to you as well. And a particularly big thanks to our audience. Your interest and engagement on issues around the Act on Climate and the challenges that lie ahead is incredibly important to our journey to a carbon-free future. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Terry, again, a big thank you to you, and have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thanks.